By the time I finished scrawling these words, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. My name is Angus MacLeod, and I'm an old farmer from the outskirts of Winnipeg, Manitoba. What I'm about to tell you might sound like the ravings of a madman, but I swear on my life that every word is true. I've seen things that no human should ever have to witness, things that haunt my dreams and make me dread the coming of night. This is my story, a tale of terror that began on a cold autumn evening in the vast, lonely prairies of Canada. It was late October, and the harvest season was drawing to a close. I'd spent decades tending to my wheat fields, watching the golden stalks sway in the wind like a shimmering sea. At 73 years old, I was no stranger to the hardships of farm life, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited me. The day had been unusually warm for that time of year, but as the sun began to set, an eerie chill crept across the land. I remember standing on my porch, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. There was something off about the air that evening, a heaviness that seemed to press down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. As darkness fell, an unnatural silence descended upon the farm. The usual chorus of crickets and nightbirds was conspicuously absent. Even the wind, which typically whistled through the old barn's cracks, had died down to nothing more than a whisper. It was as if the very land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I should have heeded the warning signs, should have locked myself in the house and waited for dawn. But curiosity and a lifetime of facing challenges head-on got the better of me. I grabbed my old shotgun, more out of habit than any real sense of danger, and set out to investigate. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness as I made my way toward the barn. The old structure loomed before me, its weathered boards creaking softly in the night. As I approached, a foul odor assaulted my nostrils, a mixture of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else I couldn't quite place. My stomach churned and I had to fight the urge to retch. With trembling hands, I pushed open the barn door. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing in the still night air. I swept my flashlight across the interior, half expecting to find a wounded animal or perhaps a vagrant seeking shelter. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There, in the far corner of the barn, crouched a creature that defied description. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even in its hunched position. Matted fur covered its body, a patchwork of gray and black that seemed to absorb the light. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me, glowing orbs of amber that fixed upon me with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stared at each other. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. Then, with a snarl that shook me to my very core, the creature lunged. I don't remember pulling the trigger, but the roar of the shotgun filled the air. The beast howled in pain and fury, a sound that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. I stumbled backward, fumbling to reload as the monster advanced. What happened next is a blur of terror and adrenaline. I ran faster than I thought possible for a man my age. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its hot breath seemingly on the back of my neck. Somehow, I made it back to the house, slamming the door shut and throwing every lock into place. The rest of the night was a nightmare of waiting and listening. The creature circled the house, sometimes scratching at the walls, other times letting out long, mournful howls that chilled me to the bone. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the noises finally ceased. When I finally worked up the courage to venture outside, I found my farm in ruins. The barn door hung from its hinges, deep claw marks scoring the wood. My wheat field, once neat rows of golden stalks, was now a maze of twisted and broken plants, as if a tornado had torn through it. And everywhere there were tracks, massive paw prints that no known animal could have made. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I've barricaded myself in the house, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. I've tried calling for help, but the phone lines are down and my cell phone can't get a signal out here. I'm trapped, alone with my fear and the knowledge that when night falls, the creature will return. I can hear it now as I write these words. The sun is setting, painting the sky blood red. There's a scratching at the door, a low growl that makes the windows rattle. I don't know how much longer I can hold out, or if anyone will ever read this account. But I need to warn you to tell you that the old legends are true. There are monsters in this world, creatures that lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike. If you're reading this, please send help. And whatever you do, don't go out after dark. The night belongs to them now. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. I rationed my food carefully, knowing that I couldn't risk venturing out to the storm cellar, where I kept most of my supplies. The creature, I had taken to calling it the beast in my mind, seemed to have claimed my farm as its territory. Each night I could hear it prowling around the house, its claws scraping against the walls, its hot breath fogging the windows. I spent my waking hours reinforcing the doors and windows, using every piece of furniture I could move to create barricades. My nights were sleepless, filled with the sounds of the beast's howls and my own racing heartbeat. In those dark hours, I found myself questioning my sanity. Could this really be happening? Had old age finally caught up with me, twisting my mind into believing this impossible nightmare? But then I would see the claw marks on the door, smell that foul, musky odor that seemed to permeate everything, and I knew that this was all too real. On the fifth night, things changed. The usual sounds of the beast circling the house were absent. At first, I dared to hope that perhaps it had moved on, found new hunting grounds. But as the silence stretched on, a new kind of fear gripped me. The waiting, the anticipation of what might come, was almost worse than the nightly terror I had grown accustomed to. It was nearing midnight when I heard it, a sound so unexpected that at first, I thought I must be imagining things. It was the rumble of an engine, growing louder as it approached my farm. Hope surged through me. Had someone finally come to check on me? Was this my chance at rescue? I rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. In the distance, I could see headlights cutting through the night, bouncing along the uneven dirt road that led to my property. As the vehicle drew closer, I recognized it as belonging to Bill Thompson, my nearest neighbor who lived about 5 miles down the road. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a wave of dread. Bill was coming, yes, but so too was the beast. I could feel its presence, a malevolent force that seemed to press in on all sides. I had to warn Bill, had to stop him before it was too late. Throwing caution to the wind, I unbarricaded the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air hit me like a physical force after days of being cooped up inside. Bill's truck was just pulling up to the house, its headlights illuminating the overgrown yard. "Bill!" I shouted, my voice hoarse from disuse. "You've got to get out of here. It's not safe." Bill climbed out of his truck, confusion evident on his face even in the dim light. "Angus, what in the world are you talking about? We've been trying to reach you for days. Your daughter's worried sick." I opened my mouth to explain, to warn him about the danger we were in, but the words died in my throat. Behind Bill, at the edge of the light cast by his truck's headlamps, I saw a pair of glowing amber eyes. "Bill," I whispered, terror making my voice shake. "Don't move. It's behind you." But it was too late. With a speed that defied its size, the beast lunged forward. Bill barely had time to turn before it was upon him. His scream of terror was cut short, replaced by a sickening crunch of bones. I stood frozen on the porch, unable to move, unable to look away from the horrific scene unfolding before me. The beast tore into Bill with savage fury, its massive jaws and razor-sharp claws making short work of my friend. In a matter of moments, the kind man who had come to check on me was reduced to a bloody, unrecognizable mass. As the beast raised its head from its grisly meal, its amber eyes locked onto mine. Blood dripped from its muzzle, matting the fur around its mouth. In that moment, I saw not just animal hunger in its gaze, but a cruel, almost human intelligence. It knew what it had done, knew the terror it had inflicted, and it reveled in it. My paralysis broke, and I scrambled back into the house, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear the beast's heavy footsteps on the porch, its claws scraping against the wood as it tried to find a way in. I retreated to the back of the house, huddling in a corner with my shotgun clutched to my chest. The rest of the night passed in a blur of terror. The beast circled the house, sometimes throwing itself against the walls with such force that I feared the entire structure would collapse. Other times it would grow quiet, and those moments of silence were almost worse than the attacks. I found myself straining to hear any sound, any indication of where it might be. As dawn broke, the noises finally ceased. I waited for hours, too afraid to move, before I finally worked up the courage to look outside. Bill's truck was still there, its driver's side door hanging open. Of Bill himself, there was no sign save for a large, dark stain on the ground where he had fallen. The reality of what had happened hit me like a physical blow. Bill was dead, torn apart by a monster that shouldn't exist, and it was my fault. If I had only found a way to warn him, to keep him away from this cursed place. Guilt and grief warred with terror in my mind as I contemplated my next move. I couldn't stay here. That much was clear. The beast would return, and next time, my luck might run out. But where could I go? Who would believe my story? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Someone, Bill's family perhaps, or my daughter, must have alerted the authorities when he didn't return. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Then just as quickly, it was extinguished by a new wave of dread. The police were coming, yes, but what would they find? A blood-soaked crime scene, a missing man, and a rambling old farmer with an unbelievable tale of monsters in the night. They wouldn't believe me. How could they? I barely believed it myself, and I had lived through it. With shaking hands, I began to gather what few supplies I could. Food, water, my shotgun, and the clothes on my back. I had no plan, no destination in mind, only the overwhelming need to get as far away from this place as possible. As I stepped out of my home of over 5 decades, I took one last look around. The farm that had been my life's work, the land that had sustained generations of my family, now felt alien and hostile. The warm memories of harvest past and quiet evenings on the porch were overshadowed by the horrors of the past week. I could hear the sirens growing louder, knew that in a matter of minutes, the police would arrive to find an abandoned farm and a mystery they could never hope to solve. Part of me wanted to stay, to try and explain, to warn them of the danger, but the larger part, the part driven by an instinct for survival I didn't know I still possessed, urged me to flee. So I ran. I ran from my home, from the approaching sirens, from the memory of Bill's terrified face in the moment before the beast struck. But most of all, I ran from the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of the Canadian prairies, a monster lurked, a creature of nightmare that had tasted human blood and would surely hunger for more. As I write these words, huddled in a small motel room hundreds of miles from my farm, I can't shake the feeling that my ordeal is far from over. Every shadow makes me jump. Every sound outside my door sends my heart racing. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, ever be able to close my eyes without seeing those glowing amber orbs staring back at me. To whoever reads this, I beg you to heed my warning. The world is not what we think it is. There are things out there, creatures that defy explanation, that lurk in the darkness waiting to strike. Be vigilant, be cautious, and above all, be prepared. For when the night falls and the moon rises full and bright, the beast will howl and the hunt will begin anew. Weeks passed and I found myself drifting from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. The fear that had driven me from my farm had not diminished. If anything, it had grown, taking on a life of its own. Every unfamiliar face on the street, every unexpected sound in the night sent my heart racing. I lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting to see those terrible amber eyes gleaming in the darkness. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that I had left the beast behind on my farm. But deep down, I knew better. The creature I had encountered was no ordinary animal. It was intelligent, cunning, and worst of all, it had developed a taste for human flesh. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there somewhere, hunting me, following the trail of fear I left in my wake. My nights were plagued by vivid nightmares. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the echoes of inhuman howls ringing in my ears. Sometimes in that hazy space between sleeping and waking, I could have sworn I saw a massive, fur-covered shape looming over my bed, its hot breath on my face. But when I jolted fully awake, heart pounding, the room would be empty, leaving me to wonder if I was slowly losing my grip on reality. It was during one of these restless nights in a rundown motel on the outskirts of a small town, whose name I can't even remember, that everything changed once again. I had been tossing and turning for hours, unable to find respite in sleep, when a sound from outside caught my attention. It was a low, rumbling growl, so familiar that it made my blood run cold. For a long moment, I lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Had I imagined it? Was my fear-addled mind playing tricks on me? Then I heard it again, closer this time, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps on the gravel outside my room. Panic surged through me. It had found me. Somehow, against all odds, the beast had tracked me down. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling in the dark for my shotgun. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely load the shells. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own ragged breathing, impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. Then, with a splintering crash, the door burst inward. Moonlight flooded the room, silhouetting the massive form that filled the doorway. The beast was even larger than I remembered, its fur matted and tangled, its amber eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. As it fixed its gaze on me, its lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I raised my shotgun, knowing even as I did so that it was a futile gesture. The beast was too fast, too strong, but I was done running. If this was to be my last stand, I would face my death with what little courage I had left. The beast lunged forward, covering the distance between us in a single bound. I squeezed the trigger, the roar of the shotgun deafening in the confined space of the motel room. The blast caught the creature full in the chest, the force of it throwing it backward. For a moment, hope surged through me. Had I done it? Had I actually managed to stop this nightmare? But then, with a growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, the beast rose to its feet. Where the shotgun blast had struck, I could see the fur and flesh knitting back together before my very eyes. Terror unlike anything I had ever known gripped me. This thing, this monster, couldn't be killed by any normal means. As it advanced on me once more, I knew with certainty that my time had run out. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as the beast was about to strike, a brilliant light flooded the room, momentarily blinding both me and the creature. The roar of an engine filled the air, followed by the screech of tires. Through the shattered doorway, I saw a large truck barreling towards us, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beacons of hope. The beast, caught off guard by this unexpected intervention, hesitated for just a moment. It was all the time I needed. I dove to the side, rolling under the bed as the truck smashed into the motel room. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filled the air, punctuated by a howl of pain and rage from the beast. For several long moments, I lay there, curled into a ball, certain that at any second, claws would tear through the thin mattress above me and end my life. But the attack never came. Instead, I heard the sound of a car door opening, followed by footsteps. "Angus? Angus MacLeod? Are you in here?" The voice was unfamiliar, but undeniably human. Cautiously, I peered out from under the bed. The truck had come to a stop halfway inside the motel room, its front end crumpled from the impact. Of the beast, there was no sign save for tufts of fur caught on the jagged edges of the broken windshield. A man stood by the driver's side door, his face hidden in shadow. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I could make out more details. He was tall and lean, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned hunting gear. In his hands, he held a rifle unlike any I had ever seen before, its barrel glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Who are you?" I managed to croak out, my voice hoarse with fear. The man stepped forward, offering me a hand. "Name's Caleb Blackwood. I'm a hunter, Mr. MacLeod, but not the kind you're used to. I hunt things that most people don't believe exist, things like what you've been running from." As he helped me to my feet, I noticed a symbol tattooed on the inside of his wrist, a crescent moon intersected by what looked like a silver bullet. "How did you find me?" I asked, still struggling to process what had just happened. Caleb's expression turned grim. "I've been tracking that werewolf for months. When I heard about what happened on your farm, I knew it had to be the same creature. I've been following its trail, and yours ever since." Werewolf. The word hung in the air between us, giving name to the nightmare that had upended my life. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but the larger part knew that it was true. I had seen too much, experienced too much, to deny the reality of what was happening. Is it dead? I asked, glancing nervously at the wrecked truck. Caleb shook his head. No, I'm afraid not. It takes more than a collision to put down a werewolf, especially one as old and powerful as this. But I've heard it, and that'll slow it down. Give us time to prepare. Prepare? Prepare for what? For the hunt, Mr. McLeod. This thing has killed too many people, caused too much suffering. It needs to be stopped once and for all. And I could use your help. I stared at him in disbelief. My help? I'm just an old farmer. What could I possibly do against something like that? Caleb's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a determination that both terrified and inspired me. You've survived an encounter with this creature not once, but twice. That's more than most can say. You know its habits, its hunting patterns, and more importantly, you have something it wants. It's fixated on you now, Mr. McLeod. It won't stop until it finishes what it started on your farm. His words sent a chill down my spine, but I knew he was right. Running hadn't solved anything. The beast, the werewolf, would keep coming for me, and who knew how many innocent people would get caught in the crossfire. What do you need me to do? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Caleb smiled, a grim, determined expression that spoke of countless battles fought in the shadows. First, we need to get you somewhere safe. I have a cabin not far from here, stocked with everything we'll need. Then we prepare. I'll teach you what I know about these creatures, how to track them, how to fight them, and most importantly, how to kill them. As we left the destroyed motel room, stepping out into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear was still there, a constant companion that I suspected would never truly leave me. But alongside it was something new, a sense of purpose, of resolve. For weeks I had been running, a victim of circumstances beyond my understanding. Now with Caleb's help, I had a chance to fight back, to face the monster that had torn my life apart and ensure that it could never harm anyone else. As we drove away from the scene of destruction, leaving behind the shattered remnants of my old life, I knew that I was embarking on a journey into a world I never knew existed. A world of monsters and those who hunted them. A world where the line between predator and prey was razor thin, and where survival depended on knowledge, skill, and a willingness to face one's deepest fears. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges I could scarcely imagine. But for the first time since that fateful night on my farm, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, whatever horrors awaited us in the darkness, I would face them head on. The hunt had begun, and this time, I was no longer the prey. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and learning. Caleb's cabin, nestled deep in the woods far from any town or city, became both a sanctuary and a training ground. Every waking moment was devoted to understanding the nature of the creature we were up against and how to combat it. I learned that werewolves, while incredibly strong and resilient, were not invulnerable. Silver was their primary weakness. A bullet or blade of pure silver could kill them if it struck a vital area. But silver alone wasn't enough. The werewolf we were hunting was old, cunning, and had likely survived numerous encounters with hunters over the years. Caleb taught me about other methods. Special herbs that could weaken a werewolf's senses, traps designed to hold even the strongest of supernatural creatures, and rituals that could provide protection against their attacks. It was a lot to take in, a whole world of knowledge that I had never known existed. But more than the practical skills, Caleb helped me confront my fear. Through meditation techniques and grueling physical training, I learned to control the panic that had ruled my life since that first encounter on my farm. I wouldn't say the fear ever truly went away, but I learned to channel it, to use it as a source of strength rather than weakness. As the days turned to weeks, I found myself changing. The terrified old farmer who had fled his home in the night was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused. My hands, once shaky and uncertain, now moved with purpose as I loaded silver bullets into a revolver or mixed herbs for protective sachets. All the while we tracked the werewolf's movements. Caleb had a network of contacts, other hunters, psychics, even a few friendly supernatural creatures, who kept us informed of any unusual animal attacks or sightings. The trail led us across several states, a path of destruction that only reinforced the need to stop this monster once and for all. It was nearing the full moon when we finally caught up to it. A small town in northern Minnesota had reported several brutal animal attacks, with descriptions that matched our werewolf perfectly. As we drove into town, the tension in the air was palpable. People hurried along the streets, casting nervous glances at the darkening sky. They might not have known exactly what was hunting them, but on some instinctive level, they sensed the danger. We set up base in an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town, close to the woods where the attacks had taken place. As night fell and the full moon rose, bathing the landscape in its silvery light, Caleb and I made our final preparations. "Remember," Caleb said as we checked our weapons one last time, "this thing is smart. It survived for this long by outsmarting hunters like us. Don't underestimate it and don't let your guard down for a second." I nodded, feeling the weight of the silver-loaded revolver at my hip. "I won't. This ends tonight, one way or another." We moved into the woods, every sense on high alert. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. We had barely gone half a mile when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Caleb and I exchanged a glance. No words needed. We knew our prey was close. Suddenly, a massive shape burst from the underbrush, moving so fast it was little more than a blur. Caleb fired, the crack of his rifle echoing through the trees, but the werewolf was already gone, disappearing back into the shadows. "It's toying with us," Caleb muttered, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Trying to separate us. Stay close." We moved deeper into the woods, following the sounds of breaking branches and occasional glimpses of fur in the moonlight. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I gripped my weapon. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. We entered a small clearing, and suddenly everything went quiet. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our own breathing. Then from behind us came a sound that made my blood run cold, the snapping of a twig underfoot. We spun around, weapons raised, but we were too late. The werewolf was upon us, its massive form blocking out the moonlight. With a swipe of its paw, it sent Caleb flying, his rifle clattering away into the underbrush. I fired, the silver bullet striking the creature in the shoulder. It howled in pain and fury, its amber eyes fixing on me with a hatred that was all too human. In that moment, I saw recognition in its gaze. It remembered me, remembered the farm, remembered the taste of human flesh. As it lunged towards me, teeth bared and claws extended, time seemed to slow. All the fear, all the pain, all the sleepless nights and terror-filled days of the past months crystallized into a single point of clarity. I stood my ground, raised my revolver, and fired again. The bullet struck true, hitting the werewolf square in the chest. It stumbled, a look of surprise replacing the hatred in its eyes. For a moment, it stood there, swaying slightly. Then, with a final mournful howl that seemed to shake the very trees around us, it collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. I approached the fallen creature cautiously, my revolver still trained on its motionless form. As I watched, its body began to change, the fur receding, the monstrous features melting away to reveal a human face. A face I recognized with a jolt of shock. It was Bill Thompson, my neighbor, the man I had watched being torn apart on my farm all those months ago. But how was that possible? I had seen him die, had seen this very creature kill him. "It's a cruel trick of lycanthropy," Caleb's voice came from behind me. He limped into view, battered but alive. The first victim of a werewolf often becomes the werewolf themselves, their human consciousness subsumed by the beast. Your friend Bill died that night on your farm, Angus. What was left was just the monster wearing his face. I stared down at Bill's lifeless body, a wave of emotions washing over me. Grief for my lost friend, relief that the nightmare was finally over, and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Caleb placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Angus." You did it. You faced your fear, and you won. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The long nightmare that had begun on my farm all those months ago was finally at an end. But as we made our way out of the woods, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had seen behind the veil, had glimpsed the hidden world of monsters and those who hunted them. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that this was just the beginning. The werewolf was dead, but there were other monsters out there, other threats lurking in the shadows. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't simply go back to my old life and pretend none of this had happened. As Caleb and I drove away from the small Minnesota town, leaving behind the scene of our final confrontation, I made a decision. I would continue this fight, would use what I had learned to help others, to protect those who didn't know the dangers that existed in the world. The sun rose higher in the sky, burning away the last vestiges of night. And with it, Angus MacLeod, once a simple farmer, now a hunter of monsters, set out on a new path. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers I could scarcely imagine. But I was no longer afraid. I had faced my greatest fear, had stared into the amber eyes of a nightmare made flesh, and I had survived. Whatever came next, whatever horrors awaited in the darkness, I would be ready. For the night is dark and full of terrors, but there are those who stand against the darkness. And now, I am one of them.